Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
A salesperson in any industry, when you go into a recession, you actually have to double your lead generation efforts to produce the same results. I also think you can look at your peers. How are you doing in comparison to your peers? Are you middle of the pack? Are you at the top of the stack ranks? The point is that everything you want out of life happens sequentially, not simultaneously.
Hello, Sales Nation. My name is Will Barron. I'm the host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most downloaded B2B sales show. On this episode, we have the return. He's been on a bunch of times now. The return of Geoff Woods, who is the co-founder and president of The One Thing. He's the host of the One Thing podcast. And on today's show, we're getting into how you can develop and implement levels, extraordinary levels, in fact, of productivity in the extraordinary times that we're living in. Everything that we talk about in this episode is available in the show notes over at salesman.org. And so with that all said, let's jump right into it. As a salesperson, do we need to be extraordinarily productive just to even hit quota at this point? Is this the new standard that we need to be hitting in the times that we're living in?
You know, something I learned from my partner, Gary Keller, which for those of you, if you've heard of Keller Williams, the real estate company, he's the co-founder of it and the current CEO. You know, when he talks about how, at least in the real estate industry, everything goes in cycles. You know, every 7 years or so, there's booms and recessions. And he says, as a salesperson in any industry, when you go into a recession, you actually have to double your lead generation efforts to produce the same results. And he says a lot of salespeople, especially in a good market, they start to have great results. They're hitting their numbers and they think they're doing awesome. But what they're not looking at is what's the trend. Mm-hmm. How high is the tide? Because in a great market, you know, you could be average and still crushing it. But all of a sudden, when the tide comes out, you start to really see who are the real performers. And so I think, Will, with everything that's going on right now, depending on the industry that you're in, I think just a good lesson is, while things are so uncertain right now, how do we become the type of people who become even more purposeful with our prospecting so that our results are still there? And that when the economy comes back and when things go back to normal, if they ever go back to normal, all of a sudden we've got this momentum that allows us to come out taking market share.
So I want to get into the tactics and some tips and training behind productivity in a second. But you said something that was really interesting there, Geoff. How do we know if, and this is a mindset question, I guess, how do we know if our lower or average performance now is due to the marketplace, it's inevitable, less people are buying, whatever it is, versus a lack of our performance or a lack of our reaching our own potential?
I think that's going to be very industry specific. Like there are some industries like real estate, for example, that you can look and see where are you in a cycle. And if you're crushing it, but it's the hottest market it's been in decades, okay, you need to look at that. I also think you can look at your peers. How are you doing in comparison to your peers? Are you middle of the pack? Are you at the top of the stack ranks?
So I'm going to ask you this now, and this is a massively loaded question, which I know you're going to kind of throw back at me, but is being extraordinarily productive, does that mean working more hours and just trying to squeeze more in, or is there more to it than that, Geoff?
I used to think that, Will. I used to think that when I was in corporate sales, I thought that if I wanted to be number one, if I wanted to get to P Club, that I had to work harder than everybody. Because when I looked at the people who had been there before, that's what they did. They outworked everybody. And when I co-founded this company with the co-authors of The One Thing, I remember being in a mastermind with Gary and he said, you know, working long hours is cheating. And this was like, stopped me dead in my tracks. I'm going, what are you talking about? Like, you've got to hustle, you've got to grind. And he said, it's cheating because you can work long hours. And if you do the wrong activities, but you work long enough, you work hard enough, you can muscle your way to a result, but you cheat yourself out of what it means to live a life. That was the gut punch for me, because it was in that moment that I could vividly imagine all the days that I worked so long and hard, not necessarily doing the right things. I was busy. I wasn't productive. And then at night when I was sitting on the couch with my family, I told myself I was being present, but actually I was checking my email or I was writing a proposal. And Gary said, the secret, if you want to live an extraordinary life, you actually have to be as efficient and as effective as possible during the hours that you work. And at a pre-prescribed time, you got to shut it down and go and live your life. So Will, for people who want to achieve extraordinary results right now, it's actually not about working longer hours. It's actually about being clear on what are the 20% priorities or activities that if I focus on those things, that drives 80% of my results. And how do I start investing my time throughout the day instead of spending it?
Do you feel like people are too, and not just salespeople, people in general, are too accepting of this trade of their life, this one thing that they can never get back, this resource for cash, or a step further of trading your life for that slightly better BMW or whatever it is that we're all aiming towards?
I don't think they realize they're doing that. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of people, we all want to look good. We want to feel good. And let's be honest, a lot of salespeople have egos. So the moment we start to acknowledge that, we might just suppress it. It takes a very self-aware and emotionally mature professional to have that honest conversation with themselves.
So you touched on, I guess, step one here, right? Focusing on maybe we can narrow this down from 20 to 3% of things that we should be doing that's getting results. Is that step one in all of this, just trying to cut out some of the bullshit that we don't need to be doing?
Well, essentially, yes. And here's a case study of it. Apple. When Steve Jobs came back as CEO from 1997 to 1999, he took the company from 350 active projects down to 10. He literally shut down 340 initiatives that had already had capital and resources allocated, let alone all the new opportunities he said no to. And because the organization narrowed their focus to 10 priorities, Apple went on to become one of the most valuable companies in the world. When COVID hit, I think a lot of, depending on your industry, a lot of people's worlds were rocked. I work with there's a Fortune 50 pharmaceutical company that we advise. And when I sat down with the leadership, they didn't know what to do because you have very high paid sales professionals, thousands of them, who sell by getting in front of doctors in hospitals and in their private practices. And all of a sudden, they could not go and sell the way they've historically sold. What do you do? And this is when what they were lacking was clarity. I heard a quote from somebody I'm in a relationship with named Keith Cunningham. He said, what stops us from reinventing ourselves is an attachment to the way things used to be. I'll say that again. What stops us from reinventing ourselves is an attachment to the way things used to be. A lot of people are attached about the way they used to sell, the way they used to prospect or close deals. And the people who are willing to let go of that old way and reinvent a way based on the hand that's been dealt to us now are the ones that are succeeding. So that's what we did. We helped them say, let go of that. That is out the window. And let's make the assumption you're never able to do that again. You're just going to shut the company down? Hell no. You're going to come up with a new way. So let's do it. What's the one thing you can do? Such that by doing it, everything else would be easier or unnecessary. And we had conversations to identify that one activity that their reps could do. Here's what it was. We call it the Adele Script. You pick up the phone, you call your customers and you go, hello, how are you? The teams that we worked with that did this, that understand that this was their one thing, that until they picked up the phone and called their customers asking, hello, how are you doing? Not with the heart of a salesperson, but with the heart of a servant, somebody who cares, just to check in on them, a care call. Those teams, their results crushed everybody else. And here's the thing, Will. When you really understand what that one thing is that makes everything else easier or unnecessary, it's a lot easier to start looking at all the other stuff on your plate for what it is. A distraction. until that one thing is done.
How do we, again, this might be a mindset question, Geoff, but I hate asking mindset questions because there's no real answer, right? And often it's less tangible. But if we're stuck with the attachments of the past and the way we've done things in the previously, or perhaps another way of describing that from another angle might be that we're lazy and we don't want to change because we shouldn't have to change. How can we reprogram ourselves to push into the uncertainty of doing something new or trying something new? How can we make that shift?
Well, the answer is you don't have to change. But if you're unwilling to adapt to new circumstances, you have to lower your aim for what's possible in your life.
So it's fair to say then that if you want to compromise, every time you compromise, you reduce your potential.
Sure. I mean, I watched Gary draw this on a whiteboard once, but when he looks at his career, and you have to context, Keller Williams is the largest real estate company in the world, 200,000 plus people. Gary's a self-made billionaire. He drew his career in a chart. He said, this is what it looked like. I had explosive growth, then plateau, then explosive growth, then plateau, then explosive growth, then plateau. And he said, I looked at this and asked the question, what happened in those moments when I moved from plateau back to explosive growth? And the answer was he disrupted himself. There's a question he's asked, and my other partner, Jay, this is written on his whiteboard in Sharpie. What's the business that'll put us out of business? And how do I build it first? As a salesperson, you could even ask, what's the product or sales approach that'll put me out of business? How do I invent it first? He was always willing to let go of the way things used to be to reinvent the way that he needed to behave to get to that next level. And I think for a lot of us, if you are out to achieve extraordinary results, you cannot take an ordinary approach. You have to start doing things that others are not doing. And especially in a time right now, I got a call the moment COVID hit, and they said, look, there's a gift in every shift. So your job is to first and foremost build a protective moat around your customer base. Literally call all of them, do whatever you need to do to keep them as a customer. Even if we have to give stuff away for free, we will do it because in their mind, we want them to be a customer. We want them to feel like we are in the trenches with them so that when we come out of this, we have momentum, because a lot of people aren't going to do that. And then they said, just get on the phone with your customers and do the Adele Script. Hello, how are you? Figure out where the new market is. And after making enough of those calls, Will, I started to figure out what the biggest challenges were that our current customer base had. And I figured out how to fulfill that void very quickly, and our business exploded. So I think if you are willing to change the way you look at things, to change your approach, you can come out of this thing way ahead.
You've kind of just touched on it there, but there seems like there's almost a bit of a paradox here, Geoff, of to push into uncertainty, to push ourselves, we need to let go of everything in the past, which means experimenting, doing perhaps lots of new stuff. But then we're also want to use Pareto's law, the one thing principles, and focus on the one thing that really moves things forward. So is this a 1-2-step process, or is this something that we should be doing side by side, constant experimentation and then constantly looking for new ways to improve that one thing that really moves the needle for us as salespeople?
Yeah, I would encourage you to view it like dominoes, Will. At any point in your life, did you ever line up dominoes and try to knock them down?
Probably at some point, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as kids, we've all done this, and it would be ridiculous to take, let's say, 20 dominoes and to line them up completely scattered and go and knock each one down individually. We don't do that. What do? We line them up in order. We space them out in a way that if I just knock the first one down, what happens, Will?
Hopefully the rest of them get knocked down as well, right?
That's right. The point is that everything you want out of life happens sequentially, not simultaneously. It's just one thing at a time. So if we look at, okay, well, what's that activity, that one thing that I need to be doing every day that'll unleash extraordinary results in my life? And how do I reinvent my approach versus how do I handle the administrative things? Like we look at all this stuff that's on our plate and treat it like it matters equally. And that we try to think we have to get it all done. And that builds our anxiety and our stress, and we get confused and we just shut down, or we focus on what we know we can do. The opportunity is to view them like dominoes and ask the question, if I could only do one first, which would it be? I remember when COVID hit. I mean, I looked at our business and our P&L and I realized 90% of our income was at stake. It was overwhelming. And yet when I looked at the dominoes, I said, what's the one thing I can do? The one thing I can do right now is I can just call our customers, not to sell them, but to serve them, to genuinely check in and see how are they doing? How is this affecting them? What are their thoughts? What can we possibly do to support them, paid or free? How do we be a partner to them? And because I just did that one thing to start, not that it's the only thing I did throughout the day, but because I just made a point of understanding that was the one thing I could do in that moment, the path of everything else truly just showed itself.
So Geoff, it took me a good week during the, what could we call it, the toilet paper hysteria phase of COVID, right? It took me a good week to go, right, let's look at my conclusion during this period was, let's look at the numbers and see if anything's changed. And our sales had gone up because we do online sales trading, and everyone else in the market wants to push some dude or woman into your office to throw up some PowerPoints and do some slide presentations because they can charge 20 grand for that versus what they can charge via remote learning or a self-paced course. So our product sales went up, but it genuinely took me a week of, crap, what does this mean? What do I need to change? I need to develop this and do that. And the answer was staring me in the face of, I need to just keep doing what we're doing and just keep plodding along. And that's what I've done ever since. And mentally, I've been fine during this process. How long did it take you to get to your conclusion to call customers after the initial kind of hysteria? Probably, I assume it came down on you as it came down on me and probably most of the audience as well.
I mean, the moment that things got real in Austin, because that's where we're based out of Austin, Texas, I got a call from my partner, Jay, that day. And he said, your business plan for the year is dead. I'm divorcing you from all financial commitments you've made, like any sales numbers. It's out the window. Your job is to first and foremost survive, so stabilize, and then start, once that's done, identify the activities you can start doing so that we come out of this thriving with even more market share. But step one is survive. Get on the phone with your customers, do the Adele script, figure out, build a moat around them so that we've got that protected, and figure out where the market is going. Well, I was on the phone with people that afternoon. And what was amazing was in less than a week, literally in less than 5 business days, our numbers were up. Mm-hmm. Because I quickly found the need and was able to say, what if we were able to help you with that? And because the pain was so high for people, they're like, sure, what do we need to do? Let's go. I mean, I had deals that had been stalled that were revived and closed, that were the biggest deals we've done in the history of the company as a result of this.
And I know it is, and because that's good news, right? And I think we should dwell on this a little bit. If you're doing the biggest deals, we're just about to do the biggest deal. Fingers crossed. By the time the show goes out, it should be done. We're just about to do the biggest both training deal and then sponsorship deal for the podcast and all the YouTube content that we've ever done. So you alluded to this at the top of the show, Geoff, that clearly this is industry dependent. There's no airline sponsors coming our way to promote business travel in the kind of near future. But there is kind of money flowing, the economy, however you want to, and I don't want to politicize this, but however you look at it, there is ups and downs and things going back and forth. But that's something that we should keep in mind, right? That deals are getting done right now. We shouldn't be backing off. We should, as you're kind of talking about, we should be pushing forward, right?
Absolutely. I mean, in the history of Since economies have been around, there's been busts and booms. There's bear markets, there's bull markets. Money's always flowing. The question is, where do people need help most right now? And how do you help them solve that problem? So I want to get really tactical here, Will, because I feel like we're, for the people that are doing well right now or might be in a good mindset, like this is probably energizing for them. Yet I also want to acknowledge there's probably people that are just so overwhelmed right now and unclear on what that next step looks like that it's almost paralyzing. For those of you that I'm speaking to, I think you have to pause and ask yourself the question: what's one thing I can do right now, such that by doing it, everything else would be easier or unnecessary? That is a loaded question. And for those of you that immediately went, I don't know, that's okay. As a coach, we know we've asked the right question when you actually don't know the immediate answer. Because if you know the immediate answer, there's no growth. There's no growth in terms of your learning or your mindset. That question requires that you search. And I would suggest to you that your one thing, maybe after you finish this episode, is that you actually open up your paper planner or digital calendar and time block 10 minutes. Literally, can you find and prioritize 10 minutes today where you sit down with a pen and paper, ask the question, and just start journaling the answer? And for that 10 minutes, you put your phone on Do Not Disturb, or you put it on airplane mode, or God forbid, you turn it off. You shut your email down. I'm not saying minimize, I'm saying hard shut down, or even just turn your computer off. Literally just silence the distractions around you for 10 minutes. Your future actually depends on it. And search for the answer. Here's why this matters, Will. Most people, time is our most valuable resource. The problem is most people spend it, they don't invest it. They spend their time in their inbox, going from meeting to meeting, saying yes if somebody calls them and asks, hey, do you got a minute? And they look up at the end of the day being really busy and questioning if they got anything done. That's spending your time. The people who invest their time hold their seconds accountable to producing a return. The only way you move from spending to investing is that you stop reacting to everything. You actually pause and get clarity on, of all the dominoes I can whack away at first, which is the lead one? What's that one? And once you have that clarity, just start whacking away at it until it falls.
So for me, Geoff, and years ago now that I read the one, it might have been during the beginning of launching the show, 5-6 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. My one thing, which is still remains today, is grow the podcast audience. When I grow the podcast audience, we get more sponsorships, more inbound leads. I have to do less selling. We get more training, inquiries, and then sales to individuals. If I double the podcast audience, my revenue probably doubles alongside that, or near enough anyway. So that's always been my focus. And obviously then cascading from that, I guess, other dominoes, if we're using this metaphor or analogy, whatever it is, simile, whichever one it is, then to promote the show and grow it, I have to create content, which then leads to doing everything else down one stream. And then I've got to manage all the ads and do prospecting for that. So everything runs from me, from creating or growing the show's audience. What other, or can you give us a couple of other examples of this, either for yourself or, without naming your clients, with some of your clients as well,
sure.
just to make this real for the audience?
Can I coach you here?
Of course you can.
Okay, so I'm turning the tables, because what you're falling into is what we call an 18th domino. There was a study in 1983 published in the American Journal of Physics that they found that a 2-inch domino didn't just knock down one of equal size. It could actually knock down one that was 50% larger. So 2 inches can knock over 3, 3 can knock over 4.5. By the 18th domino, Will, that 2-inch domino could knock over the Leaning Tower of Pisa. By the 23rd, you can knock down the Eiffel Tower. By the 31st domino, you're 3,000 feet above Mount Everest, the tallest peak in the world. And by just the 57th domino, you could actually build a structure that would reach almost from the Earth to the moon. Here's the mistake people make. They envision that Earth to the moon. I'm going to double the size of my podcast audience. I'm going to quadruple the size of my podcast audience. They have a vision or a big goal. But when they try to ask, what's my one thing? Okay, I'm going to grow the show. They think it's their one thing, but it's actually an 18th domino, meaning the Leaning Tower of Pisa is in fact leaning. Have you ever seen it in real life, Will?
I haven't, no.
Okay. It is leaning. And if I challenged any one of you to actually run and push it over, could they do it?
Of course not.
No way. But this is what's happening in our careers and personal lives, is we see something that we feel like we should be able to do. But day after day after day, we're ramming our head against the wall because it's still too big. A lead domino, your one thing, is a 2-inch domino. It is so small that effortlessly, with the flick of a finger, it'll fall. So, Will, can I help you go smaller?
Of course you can.
So, guys, pay attention to the questions I'm going to ask here. There's two 20% questions that drive 80% of the clarity. If he gives me a result, I'm going to ask what's one thing you can do to accomplish that. And if he gives me something that's vague, I'm going to ask how will you know if you're successful. So you said double the size of the show,
sure,
for example.
Yep.
That's a result. So I'll ask, what's one thing you can do, Will, such that by doing it would make doubling the show easier or unnecessary?
So the one thing that we're focused on, this will tie together in a second, that we're focused on this year is growing the YouTube audience. I won't bore the audience. You'll know all this, Geoff. I won't bore the audience too much. Podcast is not a very discoverable platform. It's very difficult to spread a podcast. YouTube will promote via content on the platform and share your video with like videos. So there's a growth mechanism there. So to grow the podcast, I'm trying to grow the YouTube channel.
So I'm hearing if you could only pull one lever to grow the podcast audience, it's growing the YouTube audience.
Correct. Yes.
Cool. What's one thing you can do to grow your YouTube audience?
Better, difficult to define, better, more consistent YouTube video content.
So by the way, folks, Will, did you notice how I asked that question? All of a sudden you're going, oh, like you're having to
feel
really
the pressure, Geoff. That's what's happening. I feel I'm going to have a sweaty armpit. I'm wearing a grey jumper for everyone listening, a grey polo shirt. This is the worst polo shirt to wear for these kind of questions.
Note to self when being a coaching questions, don't wear a grey polo shirt. And by the way, Will, you're not alone. Like I'm asking questions that are requiring you to search past the wall of I don't know. And that's uncomfortable. But the cool thing about right now is we've created this space where you can seek that clarity, because then all of a sudden, watch what happens to your focus and your execution. It's night and day. So I heard you say create more consistent content.
Yep.
How will you know if you're successful? How do you measure the success of consistent content?
So again, I might be going I'm sure you'll coach me onto the right track here. Last month, we did daily video content and a few podcasts in there as well on YouTube. It did well. And so the consistent for us is daily content on the YouTube platform.
Awesome. So folks, I'm going to keep pulling the curtain back to walk you through this. He went from consistently create content for YouTube to really defining it. How will we know if we're successful? I would create a piece of content a day for YouTube. Great. Now that's something that's more accountable. And people might go, oh, that's his one thing. Create one piece of content a day for YouTube. Nope, still too big. Will, what's one thing you can do to make sure you create one piece of content for YouTube a day?
Well, I want to say, but I feel like this is a cop-out answer because this is too perfect to wrap up this part of the show. I should time block some time in my diary every day to create video content.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So making sure that you have time blocked every day to create it. And Will, what's one thing you can do to make sure you have it time blocked?
Probably hire Geoff to have a big stick behind me every Monday as I'm planning my diary to whack me over the head when I decide to do something, some nonsense like Instagram posts.
That's one option. I would say that's not your best option. So do me a favor.
Sure.
And by the way, folks, like, so when you hit a wall and you feel like you're not really sure, watch what I do here. Will, close your eyes.
Okay.
Take a deep breath. What's one thing you can do to ensure that every day you have time blocked to create that content?
I'll tell you the first thing that came to mind. This might be self-destructive rather than productive. The easiest way to do it, I am a sucker for being accountable to other people, probably a whole conversation in itself. The easiest way for me would probably to get a sponsor for daily content on YouTube, even if it was just negligible, the amount of revenue. And that would be the one thing, being responsible to, looking after our partners. That'd probably
That's interesting. That's interesting. We could go down that rabbit hole, but I
feel like that'd be another 3 hours of psychotherapy right there, Geoff.
I think that's a distraction. So what I'm now doing, because we're at such a granular level, is what I'm looking for, Will, is a trigger. Something that you already do habitually in your day that we can attach this to. So one example might be, do you close your computer down every day?
My computer, Geoff, has been on for about 3 months and probably needs to be shut down. So no.
Yeah, your computer's going to die.
Geoff, the answer probably is to just do it, have it as the most important task of the day and do it first thing when I get down. So the recording, the editing, the production, that's all fine. Recording's easy. I like being in front of the camera. Obviously, none of this would work otherwise, but it's the writing of the content.
You're almost there.
Yep.
When you said every day when I get down, what does that mean?
Oh, so get to the office. So what I was saying though, Geoff, was it's the writing that can be procrastinated on. So it's probably get to the office, write a video, or even better, frigging hire someone to write some of the content so I can polish it up afterwards. They're probably the two avenues, right?
So what I really heard you say is it's actually not the time, it's having the idea to record.
Nope, full of ideas. It is literally, and this has been, I was always a student who underperformed through school, college, all that. It's sitting down and doing the writing.
Okay, you ready?
Go on.
You're there. When I get to the office, I will pick up a pen and start writing. That's the lead domino. What do you normally do when you first get to the office?
I probably check in with the team. That's the first thing that we do. And then I wouldn't say it was totally reactive. We have schedules and we do plan things out, but it's more reactive than sitting down and doing something for myself versus kind of catering to them.
Here's your accountability, my friend. You don't get to talk to your team until you hand them the script. And you need to empower them to say, I don't earn the right to huddle with you until I've sat down and written out what I'm going to record for YouTube that day, and I need your help. So 2 things just happened here. One, do you believe that when you get to the office, you can grab a pen and start writing?
Of course.
Do you hear how I said it? Of course.
I'll tell you why, Geoff, because subconsciously something was ticking away in my brain. Maybe it's just to make to be devil's advocate and for the podcast conversation. Perhaps this wouldn't happen in a one-on-one coaching call. But I was looking for not necessarily an excuse, but I was looking for reasons why. An excuse for want of a better way of describing it.
There you go. So, and by the way, you may not even have to. If writing the whole thing is too much for you, can you write one sentence?
Of course, yeah.
And if people are going, but that seems insignificant, folks, I'm not asking you to knock down all 57 dominoes. I'm asking you to knock down one that would make knocking down the rest easier or unnecessary. Because Will, if you actually sat down, get to the office, sat down, grabbed a pen and wrote one sentence, are you more or less likely to write a second?
Well, that is it. As soon as I write anything, we're rocking and rolling. It's that initial overcoming that procrastination, but I'm not sat there watching telly. We're doing other tasks.
There you go.
But yeah, it's getting that initial, the document open, everything else closed, a smile on my face and a cup of coffee that we're actually making progress. And then I'm happy to write. I actually quite enjoy the writing, but it is that initial, I guess, momentum that you've got. And you've mentioned that word a bunch of times in this conversation, Geoff, that momentum that we've got to kind of get rocking and rolling with.
That's right. So when you get off of this interview, Will, my hope is that the first thing you do is you go and you actually say to your team, I just had a conversation. I'm realizing the most important thing I can do for this business and to protect your jobs is to continue to grow the size of the podcast audience, because it makes everything else easier and necessary. And the one thing I can do to grow the audience is to grow our YouTube presence, because it's discoverable. And the one thing I can do to grow the YouTube presence is to make sure that we produce consistent content. And we'll know we're successful if we launch one piece of content a day on YouTube. And the one thing I can do to make sure we get that done is I have to write out what we're going to do for the day. Here's where I need your help. I need accountability. Moving forward, effective tomorrow, my one thing is to make sure I sit down and write one sentence. When I get to the office, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down, I'm going to grab a pen, and I'm going to write one sentence. I don't earn the right to have a huddle with you until that sentence is done. So I need your help that if you see me come and try to huddle with you, you need to ask me, did you write your one thing? Mm-hmm. Did you get it done? And if not, literally push me away. We'll watch what happens.
So you've tied up the show here, Geoff, and we'll have you on in the not too distant future, and I'll report back to the audience whether I'm talking nonsense or whether I committed to this. I'm going to try and commit to this. But last time you were on the show, and I'll link to this in the show notes, we won't go in depth into it. We had a conversation of what it means to be productive, why we're being productive, why we are trading our time, our energy on all these basically non-renewable resources for cash and for other opportunities. And I don't know if you remember this conversation. I won't put you on the spot if you're unsure of it, but you coached me in that call. And the one thing that I wanted to aspire to, that I wanted to do, was to fund scientific research into things that are slightly underfunded or not interesting for big drugs companies to throw trillions or hundreds of millions of dollars at. And since our last call, we've now donated over $125,000 to these different charities. It's just a percentage of revenue from the organization goes to these different companies. And that all came from the last call that I had with you, Geoff. So I wanted to just give you, because that would not exist if it wasn't for the conversation that we had. So I just wanted to wrap up this conversation on productivity with that, because when you become productive, and this is what I found, as I increase my productivity, as we kind of donate to charities and these different scientific ventures that we're kind of helping in a small way, we're helping fund and trying to progress with different things that we do with publicity and that behind them. There's a reason for the productivity then, and it kind of goes full circle and motivates you to kind of to put more effort in and to make these changes and to move to uncertainty. So I just wanted to wrap up the show with that, Geoff, because you were integral to kind of leading me down that pathway from a coaching perspective, and everyone associated with these charities. I guess I can speak on their behalf and say thank you for that as well, mate.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Good man. Geoff, we covered a lot of ground in this one. As always, tell us where we can find out more about you, the one thing, the podcast, and everything else that you've got going on as well, because I'm sure people will want to learn more.
Absolutely. So for those of you that are listening on the podcast, honestly, the highest value that we can deliver to you for free is our podcast. So if you look up The One Thing, the ONETHING, the One Thing podcast, where you can go find it there. If for those of you that would like to figure out how you actually start putting this into practice, our website is theonething.com. That's with the number one instead of being spelled out. So theonething.com. And one of the things that I would say, Will, is I think one of the best things that we do to help people achieve more is the world doesn't need a new way to set goals. You need a way to have a relationship with them. It's not about setting your goals. It's about getting clarity on what your goals are and having a really simple path that you can follow to achieve them. And if you go to theonething.com/set my goals, you can learn more about this year. We're facilitating a virtual goal setting retreat series. One weekend is specifically focused on a couples goal setting retreat so that couples can actually be aligned. Weekend is for individuals and teams. It's very affordable, and it's one of the best things that we do. So for those of you, if you want to take this further, go to theonething.com/setmygoals.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'll link to all of that in the show notes of this episode over at salesman.org. And with that, Geoff, I want to thank you for your time, the mid-podcast coaching session as well. And I want to thank you for everything you're doing over at The One Thing. I'm really a huge fan of you guys, as the audience probably knows by now, the number of times you've been on the show. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us again.
Awesome, Will. Thanks for having me.